My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I'm joined by David Linthicum, and we're here to talk about the announcements at the AWS Reinvent 2024 conference. We're going to talk about, to some degree, what they are, but we're going to dive deeper into the implications of these announcements. What does it mean? What do we see industry trend-wise? Why might AWS be doing some of these things, and what do they mean for you? It's actually interesting that David and I have both been architects now for together about 65 plus years of experience between us, but I come at it from the infrastructure side, and David typically comes at it more from the application side, even though we both been doing cloud architecture and enterprise architecture for decades. So as we go through this, I'll look at various things from the infrastructure side, and David will obviously talk about that for the implications of maybe an AI background, because that's his background, and a cloud background. And I'll look at it from the infrastructure side. And together, we'll kind of look at all the announcements and what they're made. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Gibbs, and I'm the CEO of Go Cloud Careers. And I've been every kind of IT architect you can think of. Network architect, which I'm particularly fond of and spent a lot of my years doing, which I loved. Obviously, cloud architect, enterprise architect, business architect. And I've loved every one of these roles. And I've trained people now that are working at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Accenture, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, PNC Bank, and so many other companies. And I'm joined here by David Linthicum, who previously, prior to working with us, was Deloitte's chief cloud strategist. And has been working in AI for about 35 years. David, you want to introduce yourself? We'll begin, and after that, we'll talk about some few announcements, and then we'll get excited and talk about this conference.
Hey, Mike. It's great to be here. It's also great to be working with you. As you guys may know, I run the generative AI architecture course, fully mentored. We're having lots of fun over there, getting into the details and how to do that job, and also how it relates to everything else via cloud and other things, and also how to take on the role and the details behind it. My background is just what you said. So primary, come from application development. So wrote 17 books, most on application development, focused on cloud for the last 20 years. I focused on AI for the last 30 years, and trying to make the whole thing just kind of work and play well together. I was actually an AI engineer in the 80s, doing some Lisp programming, and went in and out of that as the market dictated. But focused, jumped in back into it about 15 years ago, focusing on ML, machine learning, and how it works. And then now the generative AI stuff, which is a derivative of machine learning. And the focus is on the pragmatic aspect of it. In other words, how enterprises are going to leverage it beyond the hype, getting to the details from it. And I think that's the message I like to bring.
And I love that, David. So before we begin and have this discussion, I want to remind people about a few things. tonight from 7 to 9 p.m., we are running a How to Become a Cloud Architect webinar. And on this webinar, we'll go over the cloud architect role. You can ask about AI architects or enterprise architects or security architects, or any kind of architects if you want on this. We'll talk about the role. We'll talk about what we do. We'll talk about the skills necessary for this career. And then after that, we'll spend a good 90 minutes or so answering any questions you may have about your career. And you can ask any career questions you desire. It's all free. It's on Zoom. I'll have my team drop that in chat box. We run them all the time, at least once a week. We do a webinar, but sometimes around enterprise architects, sometimes about AI architecture, and you'll see David and I there. So join us. It's free. My team will drop a link to this in the chat box. So David, there are a couple of announcements here. And do you want to start at the AI side? Do you want to start at the infrastructure side? Do you want to start at the AWS kind of style? Where do you think we should start?
I think it's illegal not to talk about AI every 5 minutes if we're talking about cloud these days, Mike. So I think we'll start on the AI side. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think my take on all the announcements, if there's a common theme, it was with AWS was really kind of Me Too. In other words, not Me Too in the Me Too movement, Me Too in the fact we're doing this technology as well. So the agentic stuff has been hot for a while. We certainly teach that in our generative AI course. It's a way of implementing AI in ways where you're able to have multiple agents, they're able to take on personas and take on different roles and responsibilities, and they've got a multi-agent orchestration capability, which is now part of Bedrock. Seems like everything's going to be part of Bedrock's coming forward, enabling the development of collaborative agents and ultimately for tasks and workflows. So I saw this coming a mile away, and I think they're definitely going to be all over the agentic path. One of the things that is interesting about the movement into agentic AI, the more you move into it, the less cloud is going to be needed. Because you think about it, it's normally heterogeneous deployments where these agents are running all over the place, including on our phones. We now have an AI agent on our phone with Apple Intelligence. And it's not necessarily going to be cloud-centered as much as generative AI was. So they actually may see, if they move over to agentic AI, probably less infrastructure cost in doing that. Certainly they don't need GPUs. All these sorts of things. They're very unique deployments of small language models, things like that. So, of course, there are SageMaker announcements. They provide integrated analytics now and machine learning tools in the platforms. Just kind of, I view it as a maintenance upgrade. When I went through them, I was like, what's new here? And they're also including a Lakehouse, which is a unstructured data management system. It's a derivative of data lakes where there's a structured access technique, and they are able to work across various sources. Again, not a big leap in innovation there. I viewed it as just, okay, well, yeah, you're improving the product, and I would expect you to do those things. It's kind of table stakes for, getting into AI-based systems, and they do that now. There was, of course, at any conference these days, you have to introduce an LLM and a foundational AI model. They introduced Nova, which was generative AI models, a family of models that they described as designed for creating text, images, and videos. Okay. I think we need another one of those, like we need a hole in the head. But I mean, ultimately, there's just so many out there. And I think they have to provide a foundational model that's going to be part of the cloud, and that's going to be their answer to it. And so instead of putting somebody else's model, out on their cloud environment, they're able to put their own stuff out there and able to leverage it through the native interfaces, which I think is a good idea. I think it is, again, table stakes to make it happen. These models are so prevalent out there now, they're almost free. And I'm probably looking at a model or release every couple of weeks. And considering that these things take 12 days to train and $1 million a day to make them train, they're very expensive to deploy. So only the companies with the resources able to build them and deploy them are able to make them. And certainly AWS is going to be part of that. So now we have good news, bad news. Good news is we have one more LLM or a family of LLMs to deal with, but where does it fit? And what do we choose? And if we're going to build an application, which ones do we make dependencies on? Which ones do we extend? Which ones are going to be more advantageous for our particular markets? And pretty much generative AI was systemic to almost all these announcements, including the DynamoDB stuff, the AWS S3 stuff, and then even making commitments, including a global fund of $1 billion. This is the only non-technical release that I saw, which is dedicated to supporting startups and those that are going to be interesting, AWS focus, innovation, helping new businesses. The issue there would be if I'm a startup and I want to be objectively dependent on multiple technologies, including AWS, but others, is that something I'm going to look into? If you're limited to just leveraging the AWS technology, there may be some limitations to your ability to kind of get into the market. You need some you need to support heterogeneity, openness, things like that. You may be missing some of the stuff there. And again, also broader AI accessibility, tools like Amazon Q. They're dealing with workflow development, dev, operations team, and they're able to provide better integration with those. So just a few releases. I think I'm going to make any kind of comments about that. I wasn't blown away with the innovation that kind of came off there. A lot of the stuff was me too. We got an LLM. Everybody has that. Yeah, we supported agentic AI. Pretty much everybody is moving that way already. And it looked like just kind of maintenance releases for lots of the technologies out there. Before you get into the infrastructure stuff, I did hear a lot of chatter from friends of mine and clients and old coworkers that they felt that they're being neglected with the traditional cloud computing stuff. So in other words, if they're dependent on storage, app dev, test, net new application development on AWS, they didn't hear any news about their stuff. Their ability to update the compute stuff, the ability to update the DevOps tools. Well, some of that was there. And if you get into kind of the second tier, third tier announcements, they do get into more of a tactical focus. They feel like they feel neglected. And I think that's something I heard last year, and I figured it was going to go away this year. It seems to be the same case in 2024.
So I want to touch on a few of those AI things with you and ask you some questions before we go to the next one, before we start talking about infrastructure and security as well. But every one of these things that they just announced today, I'm assuming they were all feasible in the data center a year ago if you had the right gear and the right people that knew how to make it happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. There's nothing that I saw that they released that you couldn't replicate with somebody else's technology within a traditional data center. I think it's a good observation, Mike.
Yeah, and the reason I say this is I love cloud. I love private clouds, and I've designed them forever. I've designed public clouds. I've designed ISP clouds. I've been designing clouds forever, but the key is it's not new. And what I love about these conferences is you get together, you get to meet a lot of people, you get to network, and you get to hear each vendor and what they have to offer. What scares me is people, when they get out of this, they say, wow, this is so exciting. But they didn't realize we were already able to do this long before the conference, not even on the cloud, but off the cloud.
That's absolutely right. And sometimes I used to take the role of a dedicated buzzkill and let everybody know that the technology already existed, and it was certainly consumable, using other ways. It's just if you've only been in the business a very short period of time, you're 4 or 5 years into your cloud career, this stuff seems like net new stuff. Certainly the AI stuff and some of the infrastructure stuff that's there. So they view it as kind of magic stuff. I will say, though, the cloud provides the ability to get access to this technology kind of on demand as you need it. So the auto provisioning capability, the ability to turn it on, the ability to have almost an easy button for database analytics and AI is tremendously powerful. But everything you do there can be replicated on-prem. And so everybody's asking the questions, if we can replicate it on-prem, and if that for some reason is half the cost, which it is in many instances, does it make a better path to do that? And some companies are pulling the trigger and making that migration.
So actually, I really like that concept and what you called it the easy button. And the way I usually see most of these pre-made services in cloud computing is the difference between, say, a Morton's and a Burger King or a McDonald's. In the cloud, they have something that's ready for you. It's ready to go. And truth be told, for most use cases, it's pretty good. But it's not the same as going into the Morton's and having the chef ask you how you want it and preparing it exactly to your liking. To me, that's building it yourself. That's hosting in your own data center, your own domain. But let's talk about the kind of organizations that would benefit from each type. If I've got an organization that is a big organization that needs to do AI all day long, that's going to be training incredibly large data sets, that needs lowest latency performance, I'm probably willing, as the chief information officer of that building, assuming I've got the people and I'm not lacking and we've got the skills to build it myself and get the best system for the best cause. But if I'm a small business or a mid-sized business and I lack the sophistication and I lack the know-how and I don't know where I can find the people, that easy button sounds good to me. And then the cloud always reminded me from day one is the 7-Elevens or the Wawas. You pay 2 to 3 times more for it, but it's convenient and you can focus on your business as opposed to all this underlying technology. So that's the way I see it. And in many cases, sometimes the cloud's the best opportunity. Sometimes but it's all business case by case basis. Going back to some of these AI things that we were talking about, you may the whole point of the LLMs that everybody's got one. The question is, does it need to be an LLM? Could it be a small language model? It's great that we have a new tool. I love using new tools, but to me, it's all focusing on the same big stuff. Is that same big stuff even what most businesses need?
No, and that's a great point, and then the surveys are starting to bear that out. CIOs and the C levels in these organizations are having a hard time finding the right use cases for the big honking generative AI systems that everybody was telling them to build. And what I used to have discussions around 2 years ago, certainly my role in a consulting organization was how do we make an LLM for finance, for a bank, for a healthcare organization, things like that. And that's not the case. You really don't need an LLM for those things. And ultimately, their ability to leverage generative AI in tactical use cases that are going to provide incremental value is a much easier way and a much better way to do it. And so that's what we're seeing right now. People are retrenching back into much more smaller deployments than building these huge, large language models for these systems. So they don't need as many GPUs, if any GPUs. They don't need as much storage. And they can do the thing in 6 months versus, a couple of 3 years. And they can do the thing for $10 million in budget, versus $100 to $200 million of budget, and which they would say they just don't have. So what's occurring now is that people are looking at the price tag of this stuff and where they're told to build things that are probably very neat. And I saw the keynotes that focused on this, and it is game changing for your business. However, in doing so, you just don't have the ability to double and triple your IT budget to make those things happen. So there has to be some sort of a pragmatic fallback in making it happen. And right now, I think businesses are focusing on small language models on agentic. They're focused on very tactical use cases. They're focused on very small sprints for making these happen. And whether they're going to use cloud or on-prem stuff, that kind of remains to be seen. But it seems like people are migrating to the more cost-efficient solutions, and sometimes that's going to be on-prem. So it may be a very different market next year as we're talking about Reinvent to 2025 in terms of how people are defining it now. I just kind of think that the technology space has been moving after this very innovative, very expensive version what AI is, and they're trying to sell it to the enterprises. The enterprises are balking at the price, and I don't think they're going to be there. They're going to be very small deployments. It's going to be incremental spending. Very much like cloud computing was in 2009. Everybody wanted to move to the cloud. Let's go cloud. However, when they implement it, they realized that they couldn't deal with the costs. They couldn't deal with it with the talent that was needed to make it happen. And at the end of the day, over a 10-year period of time, it was slow incremental migrations into cloud computing. Even looking at now, we're probably 50% of our workloads exist in cloud, including the SaaS workloads. So we're nowhere near what we were describing in 2009. And I think AI is going to go along with the same path, limited by cost, limited by use cases, limited by talent growth, all the things that they have to deal with as an enterprise.
Yeah, and when I think LLMs, I also want to think accuracy. So here was a book I had in my old life. It was the pharmacology textbook that I had to read for one of my semesters in school. And I keep it because I periodically still go back to it. But if I wanted to create something for healthcare, I'd rather use 500 of those books, 20,000 of the best articles and case studies, and train it on that, than have some LLM that's going to go out there to Reddit, that's going to go out there to Fred Ann Martha's website, Billy Bob's website, and the health coach's website. It's going to train it on data that's not even accurate. So yeah, I totally get that too, because I assume we can get better accuracy if we train things on better data.
Yeah, and that's key. And so what we're doing now is we're doing patches for accuracy, Mike. So what's going on is we have to limit, or the models that we're building are going to be limited on the time of the exact time when they were trained. and we're making up from the incremental knowledge that was gained between that time and now with the RAG stuff, the ability to have augmented generation of systems, ability to augment responses back to the system. I think we can only play that game so much. And I think because what we're doing is we're patching around the limitation of the system. In other words, these things can't continuously learn. If they do, we have some things like catastrophic forgetting and all these things that occur in the model. You have to, treat them with kids' gloves once they're trained, and they're in essence providing the limitations under themselves. So the ability to augment stuff with more current data, more accurate data, is always going to be a challenge. And I think that the way we're looking at it now is to build these Rube Goldberg, kind of retrieval systems that operate around it, and the ability to kind of check the data and the ability to come to consensus around conclusions. That won't necessarily scale up into the use cases that I'm seeing there today. So your book, we could train it with everything in the book, but the reality is over time, things shift, things change, best practices emerge, things like that, things we need to consider that's part of the knowledge models, and those need to be considered. And right now we're patching around the inability to do that. And I think we have to get into some more innovative ways in which we're building these models. I mean, I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. I talked about the lack of continuous learning for the generative AI systems. And the fact is they can't learn continuously. We have to patch around them. So they're limited by the time in which they're trained. I think that capability needs to be in there. And one of the things I would love to hear at reInvent is how they're approaching that, how they're going to basically moving in that direction. Maybe they are, and maybe they consider it proprietary and not going to tell everybody about it yet. But it is something that puts something on the radar screen, really with nothing new that's been put on the radar screen for a couple of years since generative AI first made its explosion onto the scene. So where is that stuff going? So we've been there for 2 years, going on 3 years. What's the innovative nature of the technology? What are the gaps that need to be fixed? How are you going to do it? What are the services like to make that happen? And I think if they start putting out stuff like that, then that'll put more of a spotlight on their service, because they're going to have a unique differentiator in the marketplace based on what they're able to do, provide proprietary, because that's what it's going to be, technology that does this amazing thing. Right now, I kind of look at these conferences, and by the way, they're all kind of becoming the same as, us too, we got an LLM, we're doing agentic, and everybody seems to be catching up with everybody else. In fact, my advice to them is share the slides. If you're the keynote at AWS looked like the keynote at Microsoft Ignite, and will look like next when that one comes around. And we got to work on other problems. I think people are getting a bit tired in terms of listening to it. They understand what it is. They understand it may be needed, but knowing is taking the game to the next level and dealing with the infrastructure changes to the points you made, how it's going to deal with the network loads that have to be dealt with, and getting into the rank and file things that IT worries about. They're not worried about the next LLM that's going to come from AWS, believe it or not. They're not worried about whether they support agentic or not. We know that's going to be there. They worry about running these systems that are going to bring value back to the business, the potential use of AI to augment some of the value, the right use cases to make it happen. And clouds aren't really helping them get there. I think it would be very nice if AWS, Microsoft, Google, and the other cloud providers would map out a path in where they're going, how you need to get there, and how you can use their technology in an optimized and cost-efficient way. And that doesn't seem to be coming up now at these events.
It doesn't. And I know this is not one of the more politically correct things to say, but I notice a lot of the providers have their own well-architected frameworks. Here, we recommend you do this. We recommend you do this. We recommend you do this. But the terrifying thing to me is their recommendations without knowing any context of the business whatsoever.
Yeah, and it gets into an under-optimized solutions, Mike. And I saw this over and over again. The last 15 years, the cloud's been around. And so in other words, they're promoting a single architecture as a service. Typically, it is going to be an easy button, but the easy button may not necessarily be optimized for your particular use case. So if you look at the way in which they're deploying, when they're deploying an AI framework and their fundamental model and things like that, it is going to be the path of least resistance. If I adopt everything I know is going to work and play well together, then I'm going to get something I know is going to work. But something that works may be under optimized by about 40-50%. So that means you're taking $2 million a month, putting it in the middle of a table and setting it on fire, where you could use it to do something else. I would tell people the optimization thing is not an expense you have to occur. And so in other words, you're able to take this money and you're able to put it for other resources. You're able to put it in more innovation system. And that's how you win the game. You start throwing this money at the cloud providers because you're leveraging everything they told you to leverage. You're getting an architecture that's on demand. And then assuming it's going to be the optimal architecture of the way in which you're using it, you're going to be making more mistakes. And you have to look at this with a skeptical eye, figuring out how the architecture is going to work, figuring out how the metrics, how you operationalize these things. And that's something we also seem to be missing. And so the O word, the optimization word in terms of architecture, doesn't come up a lot. And when it does, people look at you with a confusing stare. But the reality is we're getting into some pretty expensive derivatives in terms of how the architecture is going to work. The AI stuff, extremely complex, extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And so the optimization stuff is not going to be an option anymore. And by the way, I think that's why we're seeing some people balk at rolling out some of these initial AI projects, because they're just so expensive that they're saying, well, we're going to have to do this right. We're going to have to go back and do some architecture around it, do some planning around it, or else we're going to get to the same state we got to in cloud, is running into these architectural solutions that end up not necessarily being a benefit to the business.
Yeah, and if we don't start with the business and know where the business wants to go and needs to go and how they need to operate, we always make these mistakes. But I always get nervous anytime there's a recommendation. I remember, when in my youth in medicine, there was one doctor that was known to have one thing on the menu. For the most part, every patient walked in, got the same thing. Guess what? About half got better and the other half didn't. And then they would see somebody else to get better because the one thing on the menu only worked for one condition or two conditions versus everyone. So yeah, I don't like it here. Everybody gets this pill approach or everybody gets this architecture. I want to design what the person needs, whether it be their healthcare, their cloud architecture, their enterprise architecture. I agree with you. Now, I want to look at the compute, because the compute and infrastructure pieces that came out of this are kind of interesting, and they're kind of telling me a lot. So AWS has a couple of new compute systems that are out there, and we'll talk a little bit about what some of these means. One is they have these new TM2 instances for AI. And it looks like they've done some custom designed chips that are going to be there that are designed for AI use cases. And they're going to be a bit cheaper than other solutions, and they're going to perform better than other generic solutions. So this is a good thing. The reason it's a good thing, it's showing the cloud providers are starting to realize that they cost too much compared to the network and the data center, the traditional environment. So they're looking to make it a little cheaper. I think what you'll still find for a custom workload, in most cases, it'll probably still be cheaper to buy an NVIDIA server with H100s or H200s and designing it for what you need than using this newer, cheaper version of optimized instances. But you've got that easy button with a lot of the software for you. So David and I can talk about that in a little bit, but that's something to think of. Now, it's also good to see that AMD actually released some real, and I call real, next generation powerful GPU-based instances. And these are the EC2 P5 instances that actually have the NVIDIA H200 Tensor Core GPU. So this is something good. Plus, they've got that elastic fabric adapter V3 networking. So this is going to be a machine that performs very well. Now, you'll be able to get something in the data center that performs with these identical chips that will perform at least as well. But now you're getting very close to data center-like performance with this specific system. Now, obviously, data center, we have lower latency storage, we have lower latency networks. So we're still going to get better performance in the data center, but this is a serious high-performance compute solution that excites me, that you can do big, heavy things in the cloud. Now, then we start to see, which is also where it gets interested, these storage-optimized EC2 L18G instances. And what's interesting about this is these are more those ARM-based processors, and ARM processors are performing pretty good these days. I mean, they're not going to put out what an AMD EPYC CPU is, but here we've got AWS. They say, we realize the cloud repatriation thing is big. Customers are leaving the cloud because our costs are too high. So now they're putting out there something that's got relatively good performance per price. Now, it is an ARM processor, and don't think for a minute that an ARM processor has the raw compute performance of an AMD EPYC, but for optimized code and optimized workloads, it can work really well. And you can see on the workstation side how well these have come. Apple's been using ARMs now for about 2 or 3 years now. And if you look at some of their chips, they're actually very good, especially in a notebook where your power concerned. Having said that, I had their big 40-core systems, and what was it? Yeah, no, it was a 30, 30, it was a 24-core system, and I couldn't keep up with a notebook that was running an Intel chip. So for things that are raw performance, they tend not to be very good. For things that are optimized, they tend to be great. So here you're saying AWS is taking it seriously. We're trying to get the cost of our compute down. Now, there's one more, unless you had something to say, David, before I get to the next one.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Now, there's one more. Now, this one, I can't understand what they were thinking. So Intel came out with a new, relatively good performance EC2 i7-IE instance. And the reason I don't understand this at all is these chips themselves, these Intel Xeon CPUs, are relatively high price, but they're relatively low performance. I'm actually going to show you some benchmark data between the new AMD CPU they could have chosen versus the actual CPUs that are in this, at least that generation. So and this is one of the ways places I like to go to. Chris, if you can share the screen, or Tyrone, if you can share the screen. Let me get rid of this. Nope. Did I share the wrong one? Okay, I did. Let me share another screen, Tyrone. It would help if you could share this. Here we go. Okay, so here, if you start looking at the compute performance, and AMD has this EPYC, and it's this 9655P. I think this is why AWS released some of these newer chips. This new chip is going to come out at around $11,000, and it literally runs circles around the, the 6th generation Intel new chips that are out. So the new chip that's coming out with the $20,000 price tag from Intel, if you get 2 of them, it still doesn't compete with that one AMD EPYC 9665P. So I think they could have made probably got a lot better price performance if they went with AMD EPYC by a magnitude of potentially double or triple for the same price. So I don't know how interesting that is. And if you actually look at it, here's AMD's fastest chip right now at 10,800. And let's see how far you actually have to go down to reach the processor generation they're actually using. Not the 8470, so not the 8592. So here you've got a processor from Intel that was 11,600. You can see it was only released a few months ago. And this is the generation they're using. And it's got about half the performance of that AMD EPYC that you can see right here, right now. So I don't know why they chose this. Intel may have given them some very good pricing, which they could have done. They could have given them some promotional things. Maybe they made a custom chip. And as a rule, the cloud providers generally don't know what chips that you're using. They don't want to make it that clear what they're using. They don't want you to be able to do per cost or per core performance pricing between whatever they're running in a virtual machine instance and what you could buy. It makes it harder to do a comparison. So that could be another reason, but they're there. So it all shows a cost to commitment. But David, why don't we talk about that a little bit, what that means to you, and then I'll give you some other perspectives as well.
Yeah, what it means to me is ultimately, are they looking out for the workloads that I'm going to be working on? And so in other words, they have a profile of what's currently running on their systems and what's going to be running on their systems in the future, and your ability to kind of match the processing power up with the needs. And I don't think there's a lot of that going on. We're anticipating the needs of moving forward. And so if you look around the room, and certainly lots of processor geeks go to these shows, they're going to be nodding their heads exactly. They want these things to show up. They want to have the availability, but they don't necessarily know how they're going to be mapped into the utilization of an application. And that's where I think we're running off the rails a bit. So when I am having conversations with people that are looking for the evolution of cloud providers, they seem to be enamored with the chipsets that are coming out and what they're going to be able to do, and certainly the availability to get at these systems, but not necessarily looking at the cost performance of these, and not necessarily looking at the use case applicability. So one of the things as an architect, we're question askers, right? So, and it's the designated buzzkill stuff, and you're sitting there and say, well, we're going to use this particular instance, EC2 instance, to basically run this particular workload, which we view as going to be process intensive. And My question is, have we profiled it? Do we know what the thing is going after? Is it going after memory? Is it going after IO? Is it going after processor time? And unless we do the profile, we're flying blind. And I think that this needs to be put into its perspective and probably need better tools to identify the profile of these applications and align it to the particular processor types and platform types that it needs, how much memory, how much IO, all these sorts of things. And we're missing that. And I think that's where a lot of the waste is occurring right now, is because we're misaligning the particular workloads with the capabilities of the compute and storage, IO-based systems, things like that. In some cases, putting it back on premise. And it doesn't necessarily be something that people are willing to address. I don't think the cloud providers are willing to address it, because guess what? Money's going to go out of their pocket, because they're going to end up with less. They're going to end up with fewer resources being used if people are using things more efficiently. And I think that the people doing the architecture, this adds another layer of complexity to what they need to do. So part of the deployment would be profiling the application, figuring out the optimal place to make it run. And that becomes something they may not know to do. They may not have to understand what the tooling need to do it. And they're not looking to be their part of the process. So again, they're guessing. And it came down, I had a lot of very uncomfortable discussions with engineers that would talk to me about using some advanced processors, and certainly GPUs are going to be a part of this. And the AMD stuff we just discussed would be a part of this as well. Absolutely blazing fast processors, hugely capable, but they're going to be capable in a particular use case versus another. And so let's figure that out. And so the architecture that we come up is going to be reflective of the business needs and the business solution. And then the ability to put infrastructure to it, including processor, network, security, all the other things that go along with it, is going to be customized for the use cases of that. And so I see this occurring over and over again. We're misapplying the workloads to different expensive processors, certainly GPUs, and now they have the GPU equivalents coming out, and it's just getting ridiculous. And when I see there's a GPU shortage, that just tells me a lot of people are probably making bad decisions. And so I think we have to understand that unless we're willing to burn power in infinitum, spend money in infinitum, which is dumb, is not a smart thing to do, we're going to have to get better at the architectural patterns and understand how to deal with solutions and the patterns. And engineers need to get back to it. One of the things that I remember about engineers being very good at in the 80s was we had no processor power and no memory stack. And so when we wrote applications, we had to be very particular about how they were written and the kinds of processors that we used them on. And for some reason, a lot of that discipline has been tossed out. And now we're just kind of throwing processors and therefore throwing money at the problems. And that's not going to be able to scale. And I would have loved to have AWS come out with the fact that we're going to have some sort of even if it's a serverless-based system, I think that'll be fine. We're able to take your application, understand its profiles, and put it into the appropriate platform, memory configuration, processor configuration, IO configuration, which is going to be optimized for this particular workflow. And by the way, as your needs change over time, as you change the application, we're going to reevaluate it and move it to whatever particular platform we're going to be optimized on. And that tool would come from the cloud providers. And right now they have no incentive to do it. And I don't think the enterprises are smart enough to do it. But I think this is something that's needed. By the way, it's happening out there. People are doing this. This is not something that people aren't practicing. But the large majority of use cases, people who are leveraging public cloud providers are not, and they're wasting money. And we always talk about how expensive cloud is. And the reason it's expensive, part of it is cloud is expensive because they're charging more money because they have to pay for these processors that they're putting in there, that everybody wants in there. And also, we're not using the resources efficiently. And so it's a shared responsibility model with the people who are deploying the applications and the cloud providers that are doing that. So we need to come together and figure out how to optimize this. Or else I think people are going to jettison cloud. I just read an article about Geico that finally moved off of their cloud provider because they got a $300 million bill. And so realized that wasn't sustainable longer term. And I guarantee you, I don't know this for a fact, but I guarantee you if I did an audit on that particular use case, that optimization doesn't exist. And so they just allocated stuff based on the way they felt they needed to do, based on finding headroom, allocated probably far too many resources than needed, wasn't used efficiently. That doesn't mean cloud isn't not necessarily going to be contraindicated for them. Maybe they made a good move in repatriating their systems. However, there has to be a discipline around using these resources, and it's lacking now. And I just think it needs to be brought back into the culture. So developers, engineers, DevOps engineers, AI engineers, anybody with an engineering title, architects need to ask the question, are we doing the optimization of the system? Is it any better? And we can align the needs of a particular compute workload with the underlying processor use and memory use, and get to a much more optimized state. I don't know this for a fact because we haven't audited everybody out there and run performance benchmarks, but it's got to be 50% more money is being spent than needs to be spent, just basically on this misalignment of platforms to the applications and to the use cases. And I think it's right to solve. And you and I, Mike, we're creating lots of smart people who are going out in the world to be able to look at these problems and ask these questions. Yes. And I think we just have to have more people who do it retroactively into these enterprises.
It's interesting. Something you brought up, Russ White and I spoke about just a week ago. He was one of the distinguished architects at Cisco. And we were talking about how in the old days, what made networking hard is the routers may have had a few megabytes of RAM and a few megahertz of a CPU. And yet they had to take in a big routing table and they had to be able to build a database on it, run a calculation on it in such a finite space. So the code had to be really optimized. All the thinking we had to do, which was how could we minimize routing updates? How could we prioritize traffic over our 56K line, which could have been $5,000 a month in those days? And how do we do it? And initially, every problem we had was always processor. It was either processor, disk, or memory, but actually it still is for a lot of it. But, it was initially processor or DRAM. They were the first things that hit us. And every time I've ever done an architecture, I'm always trying to figure out, what is it you need? Is this thing going to be using DRAM? If so, how much does it need? What kind of CPU performance? What kind of disk performance? And most of the time, the people that were making it didn't know. So then it was go test it. And, if you don't know what to do, get yourself systems of super high performance, low cost systems. And what I mean by this is one of these new AMD systems is about 300 grand. And you can smack a hypervisor on it and do anything you want. That equivalent compute power on the cloud over the course of 3 to 4 years is about $6 million. So if I don't know what to do, I'm just going to err big, buy myself a couple of big giant servers and not worry about it. Is that a good architecture? No, that's absolutely ridiculous. Maybe the processors would do well on ARM, and ARMs are very power efficient too, which is kind of a nice thing. We don't need as many nuclear power plants to power our data centers if we use ARM, but maybe ARM doesn't work right. Maybe we need raw performance versus something else. So, I don't necessarily know what we're talking about with regards to that, but, that's really the way I see it, is I see them offering more, but I don't know if it's enough to actually offset the cost performance. In fact, I think if they just told everybody, look, cloud computing is more expensive, but it gives you a level of agility that's worth it, and then build ROI models on agility, and then help do what we did at Cisco, which was hire real industry experts that could really work with clients to actually figure out what would be good for their business, and then create reference architectures around that would at least be a starting discussion point. I don't want to use one hospital's network and another, but at least it was a starting point for discussion. Where are you? This is what most need. What do you need? What's different? But at least something. But it feels to me like it's all generic and it's without a purpose.
Yeah, it feels like that to me as well. And I think that as we get more as we start moving the ball forward on lots of these heavy use workloads, they're using more storage than ever before, compute than ever before, memory utilization and IO and network bandwidth than ever before. We need to figure out how to do this matching and optimization, which kind of lost its favor. And so it's been architecture by headroom. And that's what I see. So in other words, we're going to get enough headroom where we're never going to run out of resources for this particular application. That's not the way it's going to be done anymore. And it was okay when our cloud bills were a couple of $1,000s a month because we had very small use cases and utilization in cloud. Now after getting to $300 million a year, which we saw with the insurance use case, then it's strategic to the business to do this optimization to get more money back. And if we were spending this money on cell phones or, on air conditioning or, something else, they would darn well look in ways in which they could better optimize those costs and those resources. And for some reason, the compute stuff just seems like a big mess of confusion they don't want to get into. And we always get into the system when I talk about that to these folks. They say, well, David, works, and then we want it to keep working. And I says, yeah, it works, but you're throwing too much money at the problem. I think it'll work for half the money you're throwing into it, and you're not necessarily going to do the headroom. Well, we're worried about running out of resources. Well, you need to know what those resource constraints are. How many resources do you need? What's the growth level going to be? You can certainly have headroom ahead of that, so you're not going to run out of resources in terms of your short-term operation stuff, but become a bit more proactive in how you're looking at this stuff. Now it's moving into AI, and now the stakes are even higher. And I think that's what's going on right now is people are finally having this conversation. I've had an optimization conversation, probably 5 times in the last couple of weeks because of that. In other words, we're looking at our bill. We just did the model. Our cloud provider is telling us it's going to be about, $2 million a year to run this AI application. We thought it was going to be $100,000 a year to run the application, but I guess we have to pay it. And so we're going to. Well, you don't. You don't. How do they know that if they haven't profiled the application and the way in which they're going to use it? And also what applications they're actually looking to build. And so you have to look at this in an optimized exercise. In other words, figure out what the problem is, figure out what the architecture is. And it sounds like they did a pretty good job in doing that. And then you back the appropriate solution into the problem. Well, guess what? That was going to be a small language model deployment, not necessarily a lot of I/O, a single API framework into the system. And so therefore, with a fully optimized deployment on that, you can run on $200,000 of cloud infrastructure, $100,000 of bought hardware on premise. You buy it, and by the way, you own it for perpetuity. And if you don't want to maintain this stuff on premise and go to a colo provider, if you don't want to go to a colo provider, then keep it in the cloud, but it's going to cost you a bit more than running on premise. But that's a darn bit change than the $10 million $2 million price tag that they were tossed at by the cloud providers. And the look would be if they didn't do that, they didn't answer the question and do the optimization, do the planning, do the homework, that would have been money that went out the window to a particular cloud provider that wasn't able to be invested in the business. And these are small businesses where that's real money, where they're able to allocate them in different ways. The CFOs don't necessarily know how to ask the right question. The CEOs don't necessarily know how to ask the right question. The CTOs often are scared to death in making a mistake, and the CIOs the same thing. But the architects need to get in there and start asking the question. You need a good platform engineer that's able to match the requirements up to the application. And if you don't have those individuals around, you need to get those individuals around. You need to get the tool sets in place and how you're going to do it, and how you're going to do an optimization exercise. Also learn that optimization typically is going to occur at design time. It's not operations time. So in other words, don't get bad architecture, deploy it, and then get concerned because it's eating too many resources when the fact that it's a bad architecture. So we go back to the we go back to the drawing board and re-architect the system and make it much more efficient. And that, by the way, you can peel off lots of different cycles and lots of different ways of doing something. If you just build something a bit better, design it a bit differently, make it more simplistic. I mean, look, if you're able to take a microservice architecture and then turn it into a monolithic, like we've seen many people do, it takes 1/10 the resources. That doesn't mean that's always a good idea to turn to not use a microservices architecture to go to a monolithic architecture. But in these cases, it wasn't necessarily indicated. We were going there because all the cool kids were going there. They wanted to use containers, wanted to use microservices, ended up with something that's way under efficient, way too expensive to run. So I'm just seeing the same thing occurring with AI. It's a bit concerning. But, I think the issue is we're talking about right now. You go to these conferences like AWS Reinvent, you come out very excited, and you want to become a cloud consumer. And I think that's all well and good, certainly has a fit, but we're not getting into asking a lot of the questions I'd like to see. And I didn't see any sessions at Reinvent that was into optimization, architecture, certainly, some FinOps-based systems with some higher level understandings in how you track the cost. But the thing is in how you deal with the cost in terms of architecture, platform profiling, things like that, the ability to implement things in a much more effective and efficient way, the ability to use, spot instances, all these sorts of things to save some money. And those seem to be few and far between. And maybe they didn't do it because it wouldn't be attended. And that's perfectly the case. But I think it's going to become more important as we move forward.
Yeah, you mentioned two things that I want to highlight on. One is for people that have not been architects. There's something David said there that was really critical. We need to find what the business actually needs. We're looking at those business goals, and then we're working backwards to design the technology solution. Many people try to take the technology and figure out how to shove it into the business. That's why 70 to 80% of architectures fail. He said, let's figure out what the business wants to do and then work back and see the technology systems that support it. That is the secret. David also mentioned FinOps, and I come from healthcare. And here's what I remember in my youth. When I was, a young kid practicing internal medicine, and someone would come in and they'd come in because they had a sore throat, I'd treat their sore throat and say, oh, by the way, I noticed you're 15 pounds overweight. Can I put you on a diet? Let me get you connected on an exercise program. And I see you smoke. Maybe we get you to stop smoking. And the person would say, I came in for a sore throat. And I said, yes, but I don't want to see you have a heart attack 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And the person really appreciated that I cared for them. Whether they listened to me or not, that was another story, but it's what I did. If we have a good architecture and we design it right, it's not going to cost too much, because we're going to design the right thing right in the first place. FinOps to me, and it always has been, was the patient that didn't listen to me when I said, lose weight, stop smoking, eat right. They were the person that ate a half a gallon of ice cream a day and went and ate French fries. And now they have diabetes. They have all kinds of problems. And now I got to put them on a lot of medications to try to nurse them back to health. So FinOps to me is, wow, we really messed up. So now we got to go fix it. And at least that's where FinOps was born. Now, I love optimization, and I always think we should monitor, we should track, and we should improve. But the FinOps got so big because the architectures, in my perspective, were just so bad.
Yeah, it has. And I think I did a video on that that I launched this week, I think, talking about FinOps and its ability to be applied correctly. And I think one of the issues we do have, and you just kind of raised, my opinion as well, it has a tendency to be reactionary. So in other words, if I'm putting FinOps on top of a heart attack, whatever the cloud equivalent of a heart attack is, you're not necessarily moving the right direction. You need to be proactive and look at stuff in different ways. And the other thing too is consider the holistic nature of this. I don't think FinOps is doing a great job at considering hard and soft values of cloud computing. It certainly considers the hard values. In other words, what we're spending, optimization, who's burning what, down to the person, down to the option, down to the process, which is all well and good. It needs to have accountability and the ability to optimize those systems in place, but not necessarily mapping things back to the value that the business needs to incur. So we're not doing as good a job at that. And so when we're getting into these platform discussions, which we just went into, using processors, things like that, and the ability to have cost-effective and cost-efficient deployments around those things, if you're going to do the modeling around it, you need to understand how much value is being brought back to the business, not just the cost reduction that's occurring. And I think people are missing that in many aspects of it. I'm not saying it's taught as well in FinOps. I do see talks that the FinOps organs are doing that discusses that, but I'm looking at some of the papers that are coming out of the consulting firms. They're not looking at it. So they're looking at very tactical use cases, very tactical cost metrics, and not necessarily looking at the value metrics. So by the way, just to push against my argument. So in other words, we may have a reason to leverage a high-end processor if it's able to process something a few seconds faster that's able to bring a multiple of value back to the business and making it happen. But we have to understand how to make those use cases. And if you can't say how to do it, then you're not necessarily missing the holistic opportunity. So with FinOps in there right now, and I think it's all well and good. It's certainly providing some value, but I think the metrics that people are applying are going to be misapplied. And I think we're not looking at all aspects and how we're defining and how we're valuing these systems. And again, it would have been great to see this at AWS reInvent. So let's talk about the holistic, and that goes to it would be the credit to the benefit of AWS as well, because typically you're making a case for using more cloud in certain instances. They were able to map that back into value that's coming back to the business. So there's the value of agility, the value of scalability, configurability, all these things that cloud is able to provide. And we're not necessarily seeing that. And you looking at it as a discipline, I know why it's not there, because the times I've had to figure out soft values, it's hard because you're getting into things that are very hard to define, such as employee morale and customer satisfaction indicators, the ability to have a more satisfactory use on the website, experience on the websites. All these sorts of things that, okay, if we're doing that, how much value is it able to bring back to the business? And having the guts, which I think it's going to take, to put some lines in the sand, some metrics they really agree upon in terms of how we're going to be defining the value. And AI is going to be a core indicator of that. If we're going to spend 5 to 7 times more than traditional systems to build this AI system, you need to be able to define the value that's able to bring back. And we certainly talk about cost savings, eliminating humans and employees and things like that. Hear that a lot. But ultimately, this is about your ability to create a better experience for your customers, for your employees, for your supply chain, for your inventory control system, for your production systems, all these sorts of things. And then not only figuring out how to do that, which is great unto itself, but figuring out how much value that's going to bring back to the business. If I automate the production system using AI, all well and good, I can figure out metrics and better balance utilization of resources, things like that. The question is, for the $10 million investment in doing that and making it happen, I'm able to save $1 million of costs over a 5-year period of time. Okay, that's good. But how much value is being brought back to the business? And the thing is, if it's not enough value to incrementally support the investment, then it may be something where you allocate the resources and go in another direction. So we're working on the recommendation engine of the website to provide a better customer experience. We're making other investments that are able to define value that's going to be brought back to the business. We're able to prove that to the C levels in order to make the investments. Those are hard. Those are very hard conversations to have. It's hard to explain to people on how to do it. And the thing is, it's always going to be something that's bespoke. In other words, if you're banking an architecture, you're making a value proposition for the architecture, it's going to be completely dependent on the problem domain, completely dependent on the business problem you're looking to solve. And I think organizations need to come to grips with that. And I'll tell you what, it would be awesome if AWS would hit that, not necessarily in the keynote presentations, but just have a thread in terms of value optimization, value assessment, the ability to have metrics that assess the soft and the hard values, and the ability to look at how this works within your organization. Right now, very few organizations are doing it. They're certainly looking at the hard savings. In other words, what AI is able to bring to the bottom line, because everybody's wired to, get to the quarter-on-quarter growth, but not necessarily the value that's being returned back to the business in terms of the soft value. And by the way, that's where the majority of value is going to be for cloud and AI. So if you're not able to calculate that, you're not necessarily making a business case for those things. Now, people ignore it and they just kind of blow by it and they say, well, we think it's there, so we're going to go ahead and do it and see how it works. But that's not the way to approach these problems. So if you consider FinOps, all well and good. Just make sure that you do something in a much more holistic deployment where you're measuring all aspects of including hard and soft values, hard and soft savings, impact on people, and even the ethical implications of doing some of the stuff that we're doing these days with some of these bigger systems. And while that is on everybody's radar screens in terms of it being discussed, it's not necessarily something that people are practicing now. At least I'm not seeing it widespread practice in a widespread way.
I haven't either. And you brought up a point which I was going to get to, which is great that you brought it up. I'll give you 2 examples of 2 different architectures that need completely different infrastructure. When I was a kid back in 2000, I worked for the largest market maker on the NASDAQ, and they were doing about 2 billion trades a day at the time. And they said to me, Mike, we have a bunch of PhD statisticians that have written this trading algorithm. and it's running good. It's making more money than anything else we have in this business. They said, Mike, if you can shave a millisecond or 2 milliseconds on it, it could be worth $20 to $40 million per quarter for us, because they could buy quicker on good news, sell faster on good news. And I said, $20 to $40 million a quarter. And they said, yes. I said, okay. I said, you're sure? Yeah, no, it could even be more than that. These are conservative. I said, so, okay. What I did, I called Sun Microsystems, and I said, what are the biggest, baddest refrigerators they had? They were these servers that look like refrigerators. And what's the fastest? What's coming out? I then called Cisco and Juniper, and I did a bake-off to see who had the fastest switch that I could put them in. Put up 2 side by side, and it was like $11 million. And they're like, that's it? I'm like, yep, this thing's going to pay for itself in your first quarter. And what I did in that case was, no matter what, it was a huge ROI. The exact opposite would be a healthcare system. Hospitals don't have a lot of money. Hospitals, it doesn't matter if you click the electronic health record and it takes an extra second to show up. Not a millisecond, a second. It doesn't matter. Now, privacy matters to the hospital, confidentiality, integrity of their data, the availability of their systems matter, and the ability to exchange data with each other matter, and whoever they need to. That's critical. But performance, a little less. So you can see in one case, we're going to use commodity type hardware because it's going to be cheaper. And in another case, we'll basically throw whatever we can at it. And that's really where we wanted to go here. What David and I were talking about. I'm used to building the stuff that no one's ever built before for these big banks. And they're always like, just make it work. And that's always the fun, geek, exciting in me. It's okay. How do we build the fastest rocket ship in the world? But that's not normal. I mean, that's banks in a specific use case that say, we've got trading systems, and here's the reason why this works for them. Something hits the news wire. If it's good news, as soon as it hits the news wire, everybody wants to buy the stock. So if you can buy that stock milliseconds before someone else, it could potentially be 30, 40, 50 cents cheaper that fast. And if you're buying 10,000 shares and then selling it 5 minutes later and doing another 10,000 shares or $100,000 shares, that can add up real quick. So that's the examples of the different kinds of systems. Now, I wanted to at least address the AWS stuff and what its implications are. And, there are some improvements in DynamoDB. There's some updates to Amazon Elastic Kubernetes service. There's some updates to CloudWatch. Maybe you get some good networking matter, and there's some improvements in security. I'll start the security one. There's some new things that Amazon can do that can log certain things better, and there's some enhancements with guard duty, threat detection, and such. All in all, you'll probably still have much greater security with some of the more industrial security tools that are out there. And all in all, at least from my perspective, any of the AWS tools in most cases are not usable. And here's the reason. 89% of all organizations use more than one cloud, and 98% of enterprises use more than one cloud. So anything like a DynamoDB and Amazon Aurora and Elastic Compute Service, none of that stuff in my mind is usable. Now, so to me, these enhancements are no big deal. I'm going to get David's perspective. Now, then Amazon came up with some Elastic Kubernetes updates. Now that gets interesting because it is a standard, which is cool. But in a multi-cloud environment, I can't use it anyway. In a multi-cloud environment, I either need to manage my own cluster or I need something like IBM OpenShift. And that way I can run my cluster's control plane across all the clouds that I'm in. Because let's say I used Amazon for the control plane. And all of a sudden Amazon's down, but I still have containers running in Google and say AWS. Nothing's going to scale or auto scale these to accommodate the new capacity. So to me, that's another thing that doesn't make any sense. It's not usable to me. Same thing for Elastic Compute Service, proprietary container orchestration program. To me, that's just what I would call introducing technical debt. I put you on something proprietary, and then when you need to leave or expand your services, you're in trouble. So in most cases, for most businesses, that 90% or more, I don't see the big enhancements there because because most of what I deal with is multi-cloud. But how about you, David? You might see a different side of it.
No, no, it's definitely. And my understanding was, and I heard this from a few AWS folks who I know, that multi-cloud was going to be a big part of this conference. It certainly was mentioned and was part of some of it, but it wasn't as big of a deal, as I thought it was going to be, because I think the AWS is understanding that they're not going to necessarily be a walled garden we're the only game in town, but they're going to have to work across different ecosystems, and that's including security service and distributed applications that exist across clouds, even though that's a hard thing to do. And I thought the security announcements were all about people who were going to be homogeneous AWS, which is nobody out there. So people who are leveraging AWS security, normally they're by definition, and you kind of alluded to this, leveraging multiple security stacks for each of the cloud providers that they have. And the path of quickest path is to leverage whatever native security services are provided by each individual cloud providers and run them as a silo. So there is no identity access management that runs across the cloud, common encryption service, common security planes, all those sorts of things don't exist. And so when I was looking at the AWS security enhancements, you mean the security lake enhancement, they have AWS security lake enhancements, AWS powered security features, AWS identity management features, guard duty updates. Okay. Who's going to use it? And if someone raises their hand, I would say, are you running a heterogeneous environment? Of course. You have on-prem stuff, you have things in the cloud, things on the edge, using multiple clouds, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 different public cloud providers. And you're trying to solve the security problem with using whatever native tools that the cloud providers provide and keeping the talent around to do that for each of these silos and trying to operate in an extremely complex environment. And you're not dealing with complexity through abstraction, common automation services, which is what security is, but you're dealing with security using whatever tactical tools that they provide. And that's not the way to do it. I understand it'll get you to where you need to be, and you can throw money at the problem and have different talents and different technologies around to make it happen. But you're multiplying your complexity times the number of clouds and on-prem systems that you have. And your security needs to not do that. So you need to think smarter in terms of how you're leveraging security and deal with cross-cloud, cross-platform solutions that deal with encryption and deal with identity access management, and getting into a common architecture where you're getting your multi-cloud on the same sort of common control plane, which scares the heck out of people because they don't necessarily know how to do that. And by the way, the tools in this space, and they're there, security managers, cross-platform security systems, identity access management systems that run across different cloud providers, are certainly adaptable and implementable right now. They're just hard. They're hard to do. And so, but the thing is, in not doing it, you're just kicking the can down the road. You just mentioned the 2 words, technical debt. And so this is something you're saying, well, I'll just go back and fix it at some point in time. Normally, it's going to get too expensive and too risky by the time you fix it. And you're going to fix it around some sort of a breach. And the breach is going to occur because you have too many things, too many moving parts in your security domain. You weren't able to adapt to it as quickly as you needed to. And someone exploited a vulnerability because you weren't able to get a patch in place. Again, you're spinning plates where something could be avoided, using common infrastructure. And I just think that's something that people are missing right now that they don't need to miss.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Is so, for example, if I want a firewall, I have much better behavioral and anomaly detection in the next generation firewall vendors like Cisco, Palo Alto, Fortinet, or Checkpoint than I can get from any of the cloud providers natively. Guess what? It's really hard to manage 3 different kinds of firewalls. But if you just standardize to the same firewall in all clouds, you don't have that problem and you enhance your security. There's very good security and event monitoring systems that work across all clouds. There's very good data loss preventions that can work across all clouds. There's very good IAM systems that you can federate into that will work across all clouds. And the reality is it's not any harder to use them in the first place and design them there in the first place. But once you start designing these systems with other things, now it gets really hard because each and every one of these proprietary little tools has their own oddities and idiosyncrasies. And then in order to get these weird proprietary tools to work, there's a whole bunch of workarounds and other stuff that we have to do long term. And in the end, when you want to go from proprietary to standard, it can get very challenging and it can take very skilled people, very expensive people, a whole lot of planning time and then a lot of transition time. And I've been there where somebody's got a virtual machine under a desk that's powering some critical business process. and the person that made the machine is unfortunately no longer with us, no longer alive. You can't even find the person, but it's there. And as soon as you power that thing off, there's something there. So you've cloned the virtual machine, and you've got copies of those images everywhere because you don't even know how to get rid of it. And I know you and I have done these things where it takes years to figure out what it is. And so there's that. So yeah, I get scared when people go too proprietary. If they're going proprietary for a benefit, I get it. Like if there's something that's better, faster, and cheaper, and it's proprietary, I get it. But Apache Cassandra will do everything DynamoDB will do for me, and it runs in all clouds, and it even writes in all nodes. Apache Cassandra. I could use Kinesis and AWS and then something else in Azure. I could just use Apache Kafka in all three clouds. I can use my same PySpark scripts in all clouds to map and reduce my data. So by doing it this way, it becomes much more like it used to be to run 3 or 4 data centers in different parts of the world. And it's not so hard to make it work. In fact, we've done it for decades. So, but if once we go proprietary like this, it gets there. And that's one of the things that typically scares me in a certification. At least 50% of the things in the certification are the things that we should never touch as cloud architects if we want to be able to work in our real world.
That's so true, Mike. And I think that that's the way the majority of programs are taught. You talk to someone who's basically, trying to improve their career. They're going to focus on training around particular software stacks and cloud stacks, and normally get certification that's localized to the clouds. And I understand why they're doing that, and they may be hired to do that on that particular cloud provider, but they don't necessarily understand holistically how all this stuff works and plays well together, and how to actually create a usable solution. So if they're going to be existing in a silo, and we talked about the different talents that exist in a silo, they're only focused on what that silo is able to do, and not holistically on the security aspects of the entire enterprise. And I think that's where we're missing. That's where we're missing the boat. So I'm seeing organizations that are not leveraging the holistic nature of the system, that are just missing some of the larger pieces, and you're getting down into security architects that are very proprietarily focused. In other words, I'm saying I'm an AWS security specialist, I'm a Microsoft security specialist. Is there a security specialist here that is a heterogeneous? No, they don't exist. That's because we don't have a common security architecture. We may have a CISO, but he or she normally isn't doing the selection of the technology and some of the more strategic stuff. They're just trying to monitor the current state of the security stuff, and that's probably why they're tactically hiring around the usage of the system. And I think in many instances, they feel that they've painted themselves so much into a corner that they're not necessarily ready to start moving into these abstract directions. And I think when they go to Reinvent, for example, if they're not getting guidance from AWS, they don't see a need to do it. They just go to Reinvent, they go to Ignite, Microsoft Ignite, and they go to Google Next, and they get the security specialists who talk about the improvements of security, very much like we saw from AWS, and there were tactical improvements, things like that. There's no holistic discussion in terms of how all these things are going to work and play well together, and how you kind of step out of the proprietary domain in ways in which you're dealing with open. So you're dealing with, instead of you're dealing with LDAP as a identity access management system across different frameworks. You understand how to replicate identities, identity management, the ability to deal with common encryption systems, your ability to deal with compliance through governance, and through security mechanisms that span everything. So this, if you do it right, it should make everybody's job easier. Now, I understand that if you have AWS skills, AWS security engineers, things like that, it's a bit scary when some of these things start layering in. But the thing is, you can certainly, if you can learn how AWS implements security, you can certainly learn how to do it through commonality and common security management frameworks and heterogeneous identity access management systems. You just have to rethink your stuff. I think your skills are going to be much more valuable, because you're going to turn from a AWS security engineer into a multi-cloud security engineer, and those are harder to find. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
And the organizations are going to benefit from the commonality and the ability to reduce the impact of complexity through the commonality. And by the way, while we're at it, let's do the same thing with governance. And just do the same thing with metadata management. Let's do the same thing with operations. We're not trying to, solve each operation problem through a tactical siloed based system, but looking holistically in how they're going to work. And And I think kind of what we're getting in here, I'm looking at the bigger picture, back, 20, 30 years ago, the vendors didn't run the conferences. They were normally magazines that did it. And so they were kind of the arbiter of the different technology providers. And when you have the big conferences, Comdex, and Software World and Database World and all the ones I used to go to and speak at, you had a representative of everybody there that were the major technology providers. And now the conferences are really owned and operated by the vendors. And so AWS Reinvent, hottest cloud ticket, and will be for quite some time, same with Microsoft Ignite, Google Next, and with a few exceptions like KubeCon and things like that. These are all vendor-led conferences. And so you do not get the other side of the story. You do not get heterogeneity in terms of how the story is. I mean, I'm not going to mention the cloud provider, but they would go through my presentation and pull out all the multi-cloud slides that I had, because they didn't want that to be part of the message. I understood it's their conference; they're paying for me to be there. They're paying for the room, and so they're trying to monitor the message. But you're not getting the word out to people that need it. People who go to the they may go into. Some people just go to Reinvent. That's the conference they go to. That's where they allocate their conference budget, and that's it. Or they go to Ignite, something like that. They're just getting one side of the story and a micro side of the story, and not necessarily getting the holistic understanding of how all this stuff works and plays well together. There's not a multi-cloud conference. There used to be, a Network World and some of the other stuff I used to attend that we used to talk about multi-cloud back then. Those things don't exist anymore for whatever reason. So the vendors on the conferences, everybody's going to the vendor-led conferences, whether it's HPE Discovery, VMware Explore. These are ones that I speak at, and then AWS Reinvent and Ignite, things like that. We just mentioned IBM. I think there needs to be a push, and I kind of urge any of the vendors to, take on this challenge to start discussing this. And this is what I heard this year that AWS is going to discuss more, and maybe some of the sessions did, and I missed them. And I'll go back and go through some of the sessions I didn't see yet next week. But normally it didn't occur as a common theme. I didn't hear it in the keynote presentations. I didn't hear it in the advice from some of the people everybody looks up to. So I think the CEO, the CTO of these organizations need to stand up. We understand we live in an ecosystem. We understand that you're going to need to work and play with other clouds, other systems, and other platforms. And here's our strategy for how we see you doing that and working with our technology. That would just be a game changer. I would consider suddenly that cloud provider is looking out for my best interest and not their best interest. But I think in looking out for my best interest, they're going to be looking out for their best interest because I'm more aligned with using them and using their tool sets. They're able to work across different cloud providers. I mean, what if AWS, what part of their security announcement, this would be a game changer, was saying we're taking our identity access management system, which does have some external platform integration, by the way, but we're going to make it completely open, and we're going to make it work across different cloud platforms. And we've localized different IAM management systems that's going to operate on the particular platforms. And by the way, we've tested everything. Here's our partner, Microsoft. Here's our partner, Google. Here's our partner, IBM. Here's our partner, HPE. And we have a complete solution that we all agree upon that's able to leverage these systems. And we're not looking for you to implement this stuff as a tactical one-off siloed-based system anymore. We're looking for to address this holistically with commonality and your ability to get to much more efficient solutions. That would be a game changer. And I understand it probably won't happen, but it would just be it would just be a dream.
It's interesting because obviously I used to go to the two conferences just like you used to speak. Well, I actually went to a lot of them. They were either vendor neutral, like HIMSS was a healthcare conference I would go to all the time. NANOG, North American Network Operators Group, they were vendor neutral. But what I do remember is Cisco used to run a conference called Networkers. And I've spoken at Networkers. I've worked the Networkers conference. And before I joined Cisco, I went to Networkers. And here's what I liked about it. When you went to the Networkers conference and you attended a presentation, if the presentation was on IP multicast, they would talk about things that were related to multicast, IGMP, PIM version 1, PIM version 2, or PIM sparse modems, whatever have you. And you know what? They didn't mention Cisco one time. Now, granted, the guy speaking or the girl speaking would have Cisco on their T-shirt. They'd have Cisco logos on their slides, but they didn't actually mention Cisco. Now, sure, if you walked around the conferences, there was food provided by Cisco Signs Anywhere. There were people that you could talk to from Cisco to ask about products and services. But all those presentations, they were like 10 different presentations going on at any one time for the whole week. They were all just technology presentations. Here's what's going on in technology. Here's how to optimize this protocol, how to optimize this. And they were the same protocols that worked on Juniper networks, Extreme networks, or everybody else's gear, because they were mostly just interoperability. Now, they had their own proprietary stuff. And they would say, here's some proprietary enhancements we've made and why we've made them. If you're going to work with an interoperable user, this is probably not your best option. If you're only working with us, we've added this for convenience. You could use this, but here's what you gain and here's what you lose. It was still somewhat objective. And if you looked at the certifications of those days, they were also less based on turning you into a vendor enthusiast. They were a lot more deep on the technology. It was mostly tech and a little bit of trade name stuff. And the modern certifications turn into all marketing names, hide all the underlying technology for you, and test you on the technician work, not the knowledge of it. And that's kind of where the technician knowledge, that's kind of where I think they fell apart. I'm sad to see what happened to conferences, because now they're more about turning you into their sales rep and getting you excited about the technology than they actually are really talking about what can be done, how it can be done, how you can use this, how other successful people have used it, and the real details of how.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of hit the nail on the head. And I think that, when I did go to Reinvent and did go to the other conferences, I just brought that away. I heard a sales presentation. All the case studies were along with their technology. And I think I don't blame them for that, because they're paying for the space. By the way, these things, the reason they're the preferred conferences to go to is they're loss leaders. In other words, they're able to, they're not necessarily for profit. And so I think AWS makes money on theirs, but most of them do not. And so that's why they're able to put such a luxurious event and give away lots of free passes and things like that, and fly lots of press and analysts in. Just basically do rah around their technology. So they're like, well, we pay for it. It's going to be many millions of dollars to do it. Then we're going to get our message out there, and we're going to, by the way, limit the message. So I get it. But I think people are getting a little tired of it. So they understand, and I think we saw this more in the last 5 years, that we're not necessarily moving to a single cloud provider. And that was what people thought 15 years ago. I never thought that was going to be the case, is that we're going to pick a cloud provider, we're going to start migrating to that. And the questions I always would get what's the best one? And so because that's the one we're going to go to. Never saw that to be the case, because if we're going to do with the best of breed technology and pick different services that are needed for the particular use cases that we have, we're going to have to do a multi-cloud deployment. And by the way, some of the stuff's going to still exist on-prem, and we're going to get into different specialized technologies, mobile, things like that. So it just becomes a desire right now that everybody understands that they're moving into a complex, heterogeneous infrastructure. And certainly AI is going to be a core driver of this, because many of those things are going back on-prem, are going to on-prem. And having an understanding in terms of how all these things kind of work and play well together, and how you make something like that work, and how you deal with common operations layer and common security layers and things like that, is not necessarily well defined. So, there's a few courses on, dealing with multi-cloud deployments, things like that, but you won't see them at the major events where people are getting the eyeballs, and you're not seeing people write about them. And when they are, it's normally not necessarily going to be front and center. So I think that when you talk to people, they feel their problems aren't necessarily being solved by the cloud providers anymore, because their problems are going to be a little different. Their problems are going to be not necessarily on AWS or Microsoft or on Google. They're going to be between the three, and all kinds of different platforms, and the ability to deal with accountability and security and stuff like that holistically, and stop doing this stuff in a tactical one-off deployment. They're desiring to do it. They just know how to do it. And I think that's where the opportunity comes in, I think, for the vendors out there. By the way, Google's made some inroads here, just to be fair to them, with some of the stuff they've come forward with is going to be multi-cloud deployment, and typically with the on-prem stuff, they're a bit more open than the other folks out there, but they're also in third place. However, AWS, I think, has a huge opportunity here to adapt to the fact that we're moving into heterogeneity different platforms. This is going to be a complex configuration of systems. We know that's where we're going. We're going to make this as easy as we can for you and provide technologies that layer right into that sort of use. And I didn't see it with this conference, and probably won't see it next year. But eventually, I think that's what the users are going to demand. They're going to say, this isn't about AWS anymore. We're not an AWS only shop. We're going to run lots of stuff. How do you work and play with those systems? Some of that is filtering in to their message, but not at the speed and not at the not at the speed and not in the relevant ways that I think are going to be useful to the folks out there. So, but it's works for them. Many people just go to this show and they drink the Kool-Aid, and then they go home and implement whatever AWS tells them. And there's a lot of AWS fanboys and girls out there who love this stuff and adopt everything they put out, very much like the following of Apple and, other, product lines out there. And they're just making things worse for themselves, both from a career perspective as far as bringing things back into the business. And if they're making the decisions, eventually things are going to break. Eventually things are going to go in a different direction. And so you might as well accept that now and take a proactive decision to make it happen. And I think it's an opportunity for the cloud providers out there that are not necessarily taking. What do you think, Mike?
I don't think they're taking it now. I think Microsoft took it and Google took it. I think Amazon was excited that they were the first, the original, the dominant player, didn't think they had to cooperate with anyone until all of a sudden you can see Azure's market share going up and you can see Google's market share going up and you can see Oracle's market share. I think the people have spoken. They want multi-cloud. I think the 4 outages that AWS had in that 1 year, along with the bad answers from the outages. Like Microsoft has had an outage and said, we've been hacked. And nobody wants to tell the world they've been hacked, but they've had it. AWS had an all-day outage and they said it was an impaired network. Now, after being a network architect for 25 years, I don't know, did a router and switch go out for a drink and get drunk and got impaired? I don't know what that means. Now, if they said they had a BGP error, they had a cable tear, they had something, that would have been. Then a week later, they had a several-hour outage due to a power failure in the data center. How do you have a power failure in a data center when you usually have 2 power companies, generators, and UPSs? So I don't understand how that happens. And they had 2 other outages. And that, to me, was when people started to say, okay, it doesn't work. Of course, Google had their outages, Azure had their outages, but 4 years ago when we started our cloud architect program, I said, everybody's going to go multi-cloud and everybody's going to have to learn private clouds too. And people were saying, why do I need that? It's all AWS. And I said, today, I said about a year or 2 from now, it's going to be 50% multi-cloud. And it's now been 4 years and it's 98% of enterprises that are now multi-cloud, 89% of regular organizations. So at 89%, I don't think you've got enough people that are just going to go single cloud anymore to overly worry about these things. I still think they'll be part of the certifications because they're a staple of getting people excited and using people more of as a sales team. So I think that'll still be there. But I think AWS is a great cloud. I think AWS does some pretty great things and has done some very cool things. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm anti-AWS because I don't get excited by technology. Here's the thing. I get excited by making my clients successful. And I know David does too. If my client, if it's going to get my client to take better care of their patients by giving them a battery, I'll find them the right battery. If it's getting an AI system to run a couple of nanoseconds faster to process a trade for a bank, and that's a competitive edge, I'll find a way to do it. I'll find whatever's going to get them there. If I've got a hospital that's been hacked, I'll find a way to make them more secure. But I don't know what that is until I get there. I have no idea what their weaknesses are until I get there. Whether I'm practicing medicine or practicing architecture, patient still comes in with some challenge to be solved. It's up to us architects to get the right information, assess, ask the right questions, make the right diagnosis, and make the plan. Whether it's a medicine with a prescription or architecture with an architecture plan, to me, that's the missing piece. That's what I wish they talked about in these conferences.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that is a missing piece. And we used to talk about it, and I think it for some reason it just kind of fell by the wayside. And I think it needs to make a comeback. But the only way it's going to make a comeback is if people vote with their dollars and vote with their opinions. If they see enough people out there making that opinion known that we're not necessarily happy with the direction that you're going and the information you're sharing with us at these conferences, we're looking to take our game to the next level, and we're looking for different ideas then they'll go ahead and do that. And until then, we're going to see tactical releases of the security systems and all the other things out there that people are looking for. Big conference presentations around the future of generative AI and how it's going to basically be, part of everything you do. And I think that's all well and good. But at some point in time, I think people kind of hit the wall with that stuff this time. Yeah, we get it. We saw it the last 2 years. We know generative AI is going to be important. We know what it is. We know how to build it. We know it's complex. It's important to us. Okay, we need to talk about steps 1 through 50 to get there. And not just defining what the future looks like, but the stepwise and how we get to the future. What are these tools that are doing? How do we build this stuff? What are some of the best practices that are there? I would love to have heard from people who are doing this stuff and doing this stuff across industries and doing this stuff across platforms. And those are the messages we're not getting out there. And also somebody who's talking about the some of the issues that they're having with implementing AI, some of the performance things that they ran into, and it's not all hunky dory out there, and people know it's not because they're running into the walls. How you deal with and how you maintain effective efficiency, basically having the platform conversations that we have. And a lot of those things really aren't just making their way to the content because people don't view it. And if I've talked to these marketing people, the people who put these conferences together, they're very unsophisticated in their thinking. Yeah. And I would tell them that if they were in the room, just because everything's like, how do we message this? In other words, they come forward, we're going to talk about containers. And the world is going to be containers. And how do we message that? How do we get everybody to start building things using containers? And I said, well, we have to understand, we need to go from the architecture into the fact that even if containers are going to be a fit or not, they don't want to have that discussion. You want to get disinvited to a conference or to a call or writing a white paper. That's the way to do it, because they view that as contra to the message, where I think that this stuff coming up is going to be a bit like 3D chess. 4D chess. You're going to have to think differently and understand that the motivations are going to come from different directions, but you're going to get the benefit of this making happen. I do think that middle of 2025, we're going to see some of the pushback on some of the stuff change, and you will see some of the messaging change. And I think it's going to be driven by the fact that they're not going to see a lot of the uptake that they thought they were, and people building these big honking AI systems. I think that they're going to run out of experimental systems to run on, and people are going to be looking at the pragmatic application for a lot of this stuff. And the big technology providers, including the cloud, but I'm also including the on-prem guys, HPE and IBM and Dell, and all those guys are going to have to rethink how they're approaching the issue and understand that it's going to be a complex slog in building these very tactical systems that are able to build up these larger values. People aren't going to build ChatGPT for a bank or ChatGPT for healthcare, and it's going to be something that's very different than they originally anticipated. Common complaint I get from the enterprise technology providers today is they're not seeing the consumption in AI that they thought they were going to see. And I was like, well, what consumption did you think you would see? Well, we thought there would be more uses in terms of people building massive AI systems in their enterprises around the cloud providers, whatever they're selling. And those don't seem to be the case. People seem to have a hard time finding the use cases. Yeah, and that's the way it is. And I think the stuff we're occurring now is that they say it's experimentation. They understand that it's not going to basically last for a long time. And people need to come to a conclusion how they're going to build this stuff. So my advice to them is retool for what people are likely going to need. They're not going to build these big, huge systems. They're going to be these huge strategic things. They're going to be $500 million in cost over 5 years. They're going to build these $15-20 million tactical systems that are able to do some values and able to do some amazing things. You'll be able to do some use case analysis and things like that. They're able to get to value within 6 months. You're able to talk about the value, and you're able to figure out how these things are going to work and play well with their existing infrastructure, and how all these things kind of fold together with where the businesses are going. They're not moving that way today, Mike. And so what they're moving to is still the unsophisticated approaches is that we're going to try to sell as much as whatever we're selling as quickly as possible, and just kind of hope it maintains. I think it'll maintain for some time. I think there's enough experimentation and tactical experiment use of AI systems, and that's what we're seeing the uptake in the cloud moving on. But right now, 80% of the cloud projects, according to McKinsey, fail. They fail to deliver value. Enterprises aren't going to move in that direction very quickly. They just can't. They got burned in the cloud in many instances where people were going after some value that they never saw, misapplied the technology in many instances. So now it's going to be retooling, retrenching, realigning into kind of the next generation of how you're going to build these IT systems. And either the technology providers are going to get on board and facilitate that happening, or if they still push these big honking strategic things, they're going to be left out in the cold because the enterprises aren't going to know what to do with them or how to pay for them. And they're great, by the way. I love that. I love playing with the technology. It's awesome. But they're not necessarily going to build what they think they're going to build. It's going to be small language models. It's going to be agentic-based deployments. Not necessarily everything's going to be running on a GPU. Not necessarily everything's going to have a petabyte of storage. Very tactical use cases. And I think that's fine. I think that's how we best adopt technology. It's lots of little battles that win the war. It's not trying to go after this big, huge goal and objective to build this massive system that we're never going to be able to build or never be able to pay for. And I think most of the CIOs that I know were on this call right now, they would agree with it. Their heads would be shaking. Yes, that's right. And I don't think the cloud providers and the technology providers get it, or maybe they get it and they just don't want to get it. They set sail toward this particular marketplace, 2 years ago. And it's very hard if you ever work for a technology provider to turn the ships, to change the messaging, to retrain the sales force, to get the sales engineers, off in a different perspective, to get the customers aligned stuff. And they're worried about them minimizing their value and their market potential in doing that, where I don't think they're going to have any other choice.
I'm with you. So one is, I totally agree. Build something, get some success, show some value to the company. And then there's another opportunity and another opportunity and another opportunity. Love that. Okay, so I know I probably need to turn it over for questions, but and as I do, I think all these bad architectures, all these cloud mistakes, all of this creates many opportunities for great cloud architects, great enterprise architects, great AI architects to go fix it and make it better, whether it's cloud repatriation or moving somewhere. Why don't we open it up for questions? It looks like there's some of them that are out there. And I know you're limited on time, as am I today.
So, David, is the knowledge and skills learned by generative AI program useful and relevant for cloud enterprise security? I think, and Mike can chime in on this as well. He has a more holistic knowledge and how the programs kind of work and play well together. The reality is, if you teach architecture and your ability to understand a business case and your ability to identify value and your ability to map a technology configuration, deal with the soft skills and how to deal with human beings and how to manage a team, and all the things that come along with becoming an enterprise architect, is not about sitting down and trying to configure an LLM. They're going to be transferable across different skills. So I always tell my generative architecture team, I'm training you to be an AI architect, but in training you to be an AI architect, the majority of stuff you're going to learn is going to be transferable. If you want to be a cloud architect, security architect, it's just enabling the same skills in another technology sector, and it's all well and good. And architects will tell you that, and you can be an enterprise architect. So in other words, you're not necessarily focused on any particular technology; you're just focused on the strategy within the enterprise. So the big thing there is learning how to manage a team, how to configure a team, how to write a proposal, how to get the requirements, how to map the requirements into a technological solution, how to manage engineers who are developing, how to deal with other aspects of it that are, not necessarily taken care of. You take a architecture course that's offered by a cloud provider, they're just going to teach you how to build a solution within that different particular cloud provider. But as far as talking to people, hiring people, firing people, managing a team, configuring the organization, managing a budget, that's what being an architect is all about. And those are the skills you get with my program and Mike's program that I think is missing from some of the other stuff out there. So if you're an architect in one specialized, you're be able to transfer those skills easily to the other. To answer your question finally.
Yeah, and Farouk, I agree with 100% of everything David said. So whether it's responding to an RFP, leading a team, asking the clients about the vision for their business, quantifying an ROI or an opportunity, all that is all common between all the architectures. The only delta between them or difference between them is if you're going to be an AI architect, your area of expertise is AI, and you learn more about AI. If your area of expertise is security, you learn more about security. But otherwise, the difference between any of these architects, if they're really doing architecture, is the same. They're all starting with the C-suite. They're all learning about the business processes. They're all learning about the optimized business architecture. We're all baselining technology. We're all re-architecting. We're all doing gap analysis. We're doing all those same meetings, proposers, documentation. So huge amount of carryover. The only difference would be the security things you'd have to learn. Great question, Farouk. Tyrone, we can bring in the next one. I'll take this one. So, Chris, CompTIA is marketing a new updated expert level for architecture named Security X, rebranded CSAP, related to AI and security architecture. What are my thoughts on this? Skip it. So I can tell you that as a rule, any of the CompTIA security, Linux, or A+ certifications, if I see them on a resume, or most managers see them on their resume, they're just completely discarded. The bare minimum ever certification I ever recommend for an architect in security is a CISSP. In fact, I like the CISSP, the CISM, and the CCSP. I typically take any CompTIA security or certification off of a resume, and here's why. CompTIA certifications, their expert will be like an intro to security. It won't actually be enough for you to do the job. Now, if it was a cloud certification, I would tell you would get more out of anything cloud related from CompTIA than you would from the cloud providers themselves in terms of actual knowledge. But on the security certification from CompTIA, they are very weak, so I would skip them. In fact, we've got a CCSP completely free on our YouTube channel. Go do that. It's worth about 10 times more than what you're actually seeing that CSAP Plus. And it's free. And if you really want any of our other architecture programs, like the cloud architect or enterprise architect, they include the CISSP because that's the king and the queen of all the security certs for architects.
Why don't you take this one, Mike?
Sure. Scooby-Doo, how familiar should we be with non-proprietary security management for cloud environments? And you listed a bunch of them. So here's the thing. If I actually look at cloud security, what kind of tools am I really going to be using? So what if I told you that Splunk holds 54% market share, Azure Sentinel in the SIEM space and enterprise security space holds about 13%, IBM QRadar owns about 10%, Logarithm owns about 4%, and 40Theme owns about 3%. So right there, we're dealing with over 90% of these. So what's going to happen in a business environment is there are certain things that we'll use that are open source, like say Ubuntu Linux. But when it comes to really managing something, it doesn't have to be open source per se. It has to be open that we can put it on all clouds. So an Oracle database is not an open source database, but I can put it in my data center, AWS, Azure, and Google simultaneously, and I don't have a problem with that. But I can't take AWS DynamoDB and put it in my data center, Google or Azure. They all have their own. That's the challenge. So typically you're going to be dealing with one of these big vendors like Splunk. And I think Cisco was pretty smart buying them, actually.
I'll take this one. What kind of enterprise application use cases from Gen AI? I like Oracle approach for embedding AI into their product line, similar to what Microsoft has adopted with Copilot. So what kind of enterprise application use cases from Gen AI? Well, I think you're saying is some of these folks are embedding AI directly into the system, things like Copilot, things like that. Basically, every product out there has some sort of AI in it. The way in which it's implemented is going to be, native to them and unique to them. So I understand you like Oracle's approach to the product line. My question would be, how much does it get to productivity? How much power is getting down to the road, so to speak, as they say within car technology. So in other words, how you're able to use it, how you're able to use it in a sentence. So, when you say does it mean the way it's used and it's embedded, architecture, things like that. So I think that we're expect AI to be innate to some of these products. People are all over the place in how they implement them. But the thing is, I would look at the core behaviors and value they're able to bring for the AI system and how you're able to use it. And that's fundamental to all this stuff. So everybody has AI washed their system one way, shape, or form. It's funny, as I walk around security conferences now, everybody's AI enabled. Of course, I can't tell you what the AI stuff does. So if everybody has AI, then kind of nobody has AI, and everybody's using AI differently. And so you have to get into how this actually is delivered in terms of value. So I would look for the Oracle stuff in terms of embedding AI in the product line with how much value are I'm able to derive from the utilization of the systems. So there's not a system out there where AI is not going to be innate to it. And if you look at the AWS stuff that we just went through, and they're probably not as bad as some of the other folks, where AI is going to be systemic to everything where it is or not. But just figure out where the value is going to be derived. Don't get enamored with the fact that they're using AI. Everybody has those little stars up in the corner where you're able to press, which sometimes is able to provide some unique benefits and value. Sometimes it's total garbage. And so I'd have to take a look at each of the use cases there.
Yeah, and that's the key, is it's really about where is it going to be used. So if I've got a company that does a lot of sales presentations, I might use AI to analyze the sentiment in the audience, not calculate how many words the speaker said or pauses between words, which people are doing, but I would actually look at the audience. Does the audience look engaged? Do they like the message? Are they going to buy? That could be something you could do. Another use case could be in healthcare, can be examining large sets of data and epidemiology. Can we find some trends? Can we find some causes? Can we find patient zero? Can we find something in the genomic system that makes somebody more there? And that would be a medical use case. We could be dealing with retailers where we're making recommendation engines on things that we're trying to deal with. We could be using it to create software code. We can be using specially trained models to generate stock legal content. So there's AI everywhere. The real question is looking at the business needs, looking at the assets that business has, including its people, its processes, and technology, and look for ways and challenges in those systems specific to that business that we can make an improvement. Because if you look at a business hard enough, I worked with one hospital, and when we analyzed the hospital, we found the nurses were running around like crazy. And the solution was to put a second ice machine on the nursing ward. And it saved about an hour overtime from every single nurse. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot of money in a hospital. And it could be something that trivial. But sometimes something that trivial says, oh, wait, we've got this inefficiency here. Now, maybe another computer terminal can help that. And maybe it's as simple as that. But maybe it's much more complicated. Maybe after you see this thing is done again and again and again and again and again, and it keeps taking expensive people's time, that's a process that can be automated and shifted over directly to AI. So the real key is, before we determine a use case, we've got to go figure out what problems those business has. And it's much like, practicing medicine. I can't have this use case. Appendectomy, coming for you. Hip replacement, coming for you. Coronary artery bypass test, coming for you as a use case. I have a patient that has a problem. Every patient's problem is similar but unique. So that same thing with the business. One business has a cash flow problem, and based upon the way their small margins are and the speed they need to turn their inventories over. Great. A healthcare organization may make all its money in recruiting people from another part of the world to get expensive elective procedures. And everything else they do is charity. So they want to figure out a way to get more of those expensive procedures and spend less money on the charity work, for example. You've got another business that's a high frequency trader. They need a system that can trade better, faster, and cheaper than the competition. But it all goes back to, what are those actual needs? What are the challenges that client actually has? What problems are we trying to solve? And I think that's where David and I go to use cases, is we really want to know what the issue is. Just because some vendor integrates with somebody else, so what? Just because my car has a stereo system from somebody, so what? If the car to stereo doesn't meet what I need it, I can always get a different stereo. I'm more concerned with, and here's how I buy a car, I'll tell you right now. I have 5 herniated discs. Every time I have to buy a car, every 10 years or so, I go to every car dealer and I sit in every single car to see which one doesn't hurt my back. The one that doesn't hurt my back is the one that I buy. I'm not joking. The previous one was a Volvo. This one was a Mercedes. All in all, I think the Toyota Camry my wife has is a better car than my Mercedes. but it doesn't fit my back. 5 minutes in there and my back hurts. So my use case is I go look for my back. Somebody else looks for performance. Somebody else gets the color they want. I don't care. I just want something that doesn't hurt my back. And I kind of hope that's what we're looking at. We're trying to look for, every person, every problem has their own challenges that they're trying to solve. So what is it that you need to solve for that business? What is it that you could do? But, you can use AI to search videos to make sure there's nothing offensive to your audience. And that could be something that could be appropriate. And I've seen people do it. And you could even use that if you had the right tools prior to an interview to see if your room looks the right way based upon what it could or should. Because I literally have had people interview people and they have found things in their environment that they've said were offensive, that they would no longer interview the person for it. I'm literally not joking. Somebody I know lost out on a very good job because of a hobby of theirs and some glassware they had behind them. Data Wrangler. I appreciate the more spectacle cold shower type of analysis. You got too tired of hearing how AI everything will solve all business problems. Well, Data Wrangler, I don't want to think that we're a cold shower perspective. I just want to think that we're looking at it fair and objectively. So we're not trying to tell you how you should feel about something. We're giving you the objective perspective of two people that have designed architectures that each have 25 to 35 years experience, who've all been there and have seen every shiny new object that's been placed in front of us, that have seen all the new shiny object system, from the new router to the new load balancer to the fancy first multi-core servers that we were dealing with to the faster storage. And every time there was something new, it was like Cookie Monster with a bunch of cookies, and everybody bought it. Every business bought it. And then they went, wait, this didn't help us. Now what do we do? And the reason it never helped them was not because the tools were good. They just didn't apply them right. Let me go back to you, David.
Healthy skepticism is fundamental to us figuring this stuff out. And I've been a skeptic around this technology for a long period of time. And the thing is, as an architect, I have to be a skeptic. I have to look at the good and bad aspects of this stuff, and where things are a fit and where things are not a fit. And enough of that is occurring these days. People have a tendency to kind of go to our narrative and go to the party line, and they talk about only the good things around the technology providers when there's good aspects and bad aspects about the technology providers. And people are sometimes taken back by that. There's some sort of a skeptical contrarian opinion, but I think that's a healthy thing to do. And it's funny, it's like the ones that I'm hearing now and the folks that are at AWS, they normally have a skeptical opinion of the conference that they're at. So they pay to go to the conference, but they're skeptical about what's being told to them and their ability to kind of find value. And I think that's absolutely a good thing to do. And if you take an architecture class, if it's worth its weight, they talk to you about how to ask questions and how to look at the value of stuff and the ability to look at stuff. That doesn't mean you're anti-cloud or anti-on-prem. That means that we're looking at all solutions, the ability to look at the trade-offs between them. There's always a downside to using a platform or a tool or an approach, and there's always an upside to using the same thing. Your ability to kind of go into that with both eyes open in terms of what they're able to do and what they're not able to do is going to go directly to your success. If you don't understand those things, you're going to get caught up with some limitations. You learn too far down the path. And I think that's why healthy skepticism is a big part of IT, and it's certainly a big part of IT architecture, AI architecture, cloud architecture, security architecture, because at the end of the day, we're problem solvers. And you can only solve problems if you understand the solutions out there and if they're able to solve your problems or not.
Yeah, and when I learned to be a scientist in my youth, and an architect is a scientist, they said all scientists should have a degree of relative skepticism. That means you should approach anything, not necessarily believe anything until you have a chance to analyze it, look at the facts and figures. So, that's what David and I do. We approach this very scientifically. We don't go to a conference. We don't go and say, ooh, how exciting. No, I'm not saying that I didn't do that 25 years ago when I went to my first tech conference. And I'm not going to say that David didn't too at his first tech conference, because even though we had a scientific framework, it was still, but there was a point in our careers where we looked at it and said, wait a second, our whole job here is to help the customer. The only way we help the customer is by understanding their actual needs. And how do we help the customer until we know what their needs are? We can't. So we always have to do this. And in everything, once you make it as an architect, you're going to have 1,000 people each day trying to get on your calendar to show you their new and exciting thing. And then you say, send it to me. And then it's going to have 50 pages of stuff that doesn't say a single word on it. And then it's like, okay, could you boil it down to a single page? And when they can't boil it down to a single page, that's when you know to run. For example, somebody wanted me to make a YouTube video on something that would go to a NoSQL database, pull it, and then made it look like block storage. I said, so you created a storage gateway between either object storage or a NoSQL database and making it feel like block storage. And they're like, well, yeah, but no. And they went on for like 15 minutes. And I said, okay, you created a gateway to go from one storage to the other. Now, where's it helping my client? They couldn't answer it. And I was like, okay, I can't make a YouTube video on this. I mean, not that I would take a paid YouTube video. I wouldn't, because I don't want to lose my objectivity. There's nothing wrong with it, but this is an objective platform and I can't take a paid video for that. But I would have given them a chance to speak to the audience if I thought it was something that was good, but got to be there. So that's that shiny object syndrome. Anyway, I hope everyone that's here has actually had a good time, learned something, gotten a perspective of the AWS reInvent 2024 highlights, what these AWS announcements mean to you. I hope you've gotten the cloud architect perspective, the enterprise architect, the AI perspective, what have you. We currently, until the end of the week, have a 50% sale off of all our programs, including David's incredible AI architect program, our cloud architect program, enterprise architect program as well. So till Friday, please take advantage of that. Tonight, between 7 and 9 o'clock tonight, I am hosting a webinar on how to become an architect and get your first job, where we will cover every single skill in the career, what you need to do, how you can get hired, how to skip those HR people from auto-rejecting you, because they will unless you know what to do, and how to get past them, and how to build yourself a great career. And then we'll spend lots of time asking questions. David, I always am so grateful when you join these sessions and share your expertise with our audience. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm happy to do it, Mike, and I hope everybody got something out of it. I think we had some great perspectives on the AWS event, and hopefully we gave some value to you. So reach out if you need us, as we're here for.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe, hit the bell, do all those YouTube things. Take care, everyone.
Bye.